Wow, I'm sure our listeners just appreciated watching us all get a drink of water. We are now live.
Yay!
Jeez.
Usually
Wow.
we haven't been live the last couple times, so of course, the one time we decide to actually go live, yeah. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Audible.com. What the hell? Okay. Hey, it's live, dude. It's live. Anyone that submits themselves to the live version of this podcast deserves it.
Quite
3,
right, too.
2, 1. Today's broadcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get your free audiobook download and 30-day trial at www.audibletrial.com/literary roadhouse.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Gerald,
I'm Maya.
And I'm Anais.
and on today's show we are discussing Constance's Law by Bridget Hardy.
But first, I must let you know that Literary Roadhouse is rated PG-13 for occasional potty mouth. If you have preteens or teens that you would like to listen to this show, please visit the iTunes store for the individual episode ratings and pre-listen to the episodes before sharing.
Before we get started, I just want to read a comment from one of the hosts of the Bibliophilia podcast. They left us a wonderful review saying, "I'm always game for a great podcast about literature. This one is pretty good. They really go in depth to understand the stories. It's kind of surprising to me that they appear to have met online, and I think that really affects how they interact. I have a feeling that it will smooth itself out later on as they get to know each other better. I'm sure I'll keep listening in the future."
I think that is a really great comment. Have either of you listened to the first episode? Have gone back and listened to the first one? We're like 13 episodes in.
No.
You really should. It's kind of crazy just how much we've gotten to know each other and improved over the last 13 episodes, and it's kind of a trip to go back in time a little bit because it actually wasn't that long ago, and we really do sound much different than we did when we first started.
Wow. And we've improved.
I think we've improved. I think we sound pretty snazzy. If I do say so myself. But you know what that comment reminds me of? We are currently working on making a list of all of our favorite podcasts, our favorite literature podcasts, to put in the resource section of the website. And so if any of our listeners has a favorite podcast, outside of us, of course, go ahead and send us a link via the website or via Twitter, and that way we can add that to the list.
Now, if you haven't read Constance's Law yet and don't want to be spoiled, pause the podcast, read the story, and then come back. So today's story, Constance's Law, centers around a young white woman living with her protective parents in a small town in Indiana. Straight away we know something went badly wrong for her in the past, and pretty soon we're informed that she was raped. This has affected her whole life, and rather than taking up a fellowship to Berkeley, she went to work in the local post office. She still works there, although now in the rear of the post office, so she can avoid the looks and platitudes of the local people. Out of the blue, a man calls up that she knew in high school. He's moved away, and now lives and works in Chicago. He's back in town and asks if he can see her. He's called Cal, and he's black. When she tells her parents, there's an exchange of looks between them. Later, we learn that the man who raped her was also black. They have a date, and Cal is respectful and careful with her. They have lots of laughs and clearly get on well together. They have a meal, and he goes home, making a date for lunch the next day. The lunch is pleasant, light-hearted, and Cal buys some stamps when he has escorted her back to the post office, saying that he's expecting to write a lot of letters in the future. After dinner one night, Constance's mother suggests that Cal should come to dinner, but her father isn't happy with that and suggests she might wait to date somebody else. Eventually, he admits it's because Cal is black. After some inward discussion, Constance decides to go to Cal's parents' house unannounced, where he is staying. His parents are respectful, and Constance and Cal head out on a date, but Constance insists on Cal going back to her place. They sleep together, which is a frighteningly emotional experience for Constance, but Cal looks after her, holding her tight while she cries, and in the morning she worries for their future.
So, who wants to start? Anais has a grin on her face. You start.
Well,
I like it when you grin
loved
like
it.
that. You did? You loved it?
I loved it. I loved it.
I really didn't think you would. Wow. What did you like about it?
Yeah,
I don't know. As I was reading it, I was like, I don't think Anais is going to like this story.
I thought it was amazing. I thought it was great. See, surprise you all the time. No, I enjoyed just the story itself was great. The themes that it explored, I thought it explored very well, and it was ambitious. It had a lot of themes. The language was economical and smart, very clever. At the end of it, I finished reading and I was like, wow, Carve Magazine 2 for 2. Great curating job, because I'm really impressed.
How about you, Gerald?
Yeah, I loved it. 2 sentences in, and I knew I was going to like it. It's my sort of writing. It's direct. It's straightforward. It hints at stuff that's going to happen later on, and you can't wait to get there. And they're dropping bits of information. She's dropping bits of information all the way through. So the whole story is gradually revealed to you. The themes, again, as Anais says, the themes are great and well explored. And I just love the style of writing. It just suits me.
And the podcast just went to help, because I liked it too. This is one of those rare stories where there was a lot of telling and it was distant, but it pulled me in very slowly in a way that was really enjoyable. There were a few hiccups where I was like, but it was one of those stories where I immediately wanted to look up the author, and then was both excited and disappointed that it was a fairly new author that I couldn't find any information about. So, yeah, everybody can just hang up now.
Enjoy the podcast.
LiteraryRoadhouse.com. Okay.
It's quite strange. I do like, sort of, in a way, finding new authors, but sometimes it's sort of difficult, because people write and then they go on to do other things, and they're not, maybe they're not writing anymore, or not writing as much, or not as prolific. So I contacted Carve Magazine, and they've agreed for us to send some information on from us to her.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
hopefully by the time the podcast goes up on the site, it will have some information back from Bridget.
I'm really looking forward to it. It was funny when I read her little bio at the top of the story. It said that she has an MFA and she's working as an aerobics instructor. I was like, you go, girl. You just keep chipping out those stories. You're going to be famous someday. This is great. Okay, let's get deeper, though, because I liked it. It was wonderful. Is not deep enough for this podcast. So let's talk about some of the themes that we enjoyed. Anything in particular that really stood out to you about the story?
I'm just going to have to, at random, pick where to start, because there's so many equally juicy places. So I kind of want to start with this idea of, I like when she looked at the way when a tragedy happens, how it affects sort of the national conversation, which she touched on very lightly, and then the family, and then the individual, and how those perspectives change the deeper you go in, right? Because they talk about the woman who's trying to help by pushing Constance's law. The very protective father is like, no, like, we don't want this tragedy that happened to our daughter to be the only thing that she's famous about. And then Constance is even, there's that line where she's like, she appreciates what her parents did. She understands that she can't do this alone. At the same time, she has these sort of moments where she fantasizes about saying cruel stuff to them, because her own experience is even different from the sheltered way that they've approached it. And I thought that was beautifully done. It was not at all ham-fisted. I loved it.
Okay, real quick, so I can cut this out in the podcast. Anais, can you tilt your microphone a little bit and talk past the tip?
Like this?
I'm getting some of the peas are popping. Okay, now back to the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the themes that really struck me about this was the theme of what it is to be a victim, and how protecting and sheltering someone that has been assaulted is actually more victimizing. Like, I would say a large part of what is keeping her in that victim mode is her surroundings continuing to treat her that way. And it's not letting her loose. And one of the beautiful things about meeting Cal is they did know each other from before, and he doesn't treat, like, he treats her kindly, but he treats her normal. You know, he doesn't call her up and pity her, and that allows her some freedom, and that's what allows her to be able to visualize towards the end, visualize something different, because someone finally treated her as something else. And you know, the line about the kindness of strangers, like, you know, her parents going against Constance's law, it's like they knew on some level that she shouldn't be, that would be harmful for her, but yet they did the same thing to her in a different way. And I think that's really common in assault. I think it's something that isn't, like, when you read stories, there's a lot of stories about rape and assault and all those types of subjects, but usually it's told in a way that, usually it's an educational story, or it's really all about the pain. It doesn't really, I very rarely see anything addressing how other people responding to it can affect the person who actually experienced it. And that to me was super ambitious and really worthy of praise. And the fact that it was done well was something that I was really excited by.
Yeah, I loved Cal as a character because it's you said, you know, he just called her up and treated her normal, and it's only later when she said, you called me up a few times that summer, you know, was that before or after? And obviously the rape, and you said twice before and twice after, and it's just sort of, but he didn't know then whether to keep calling or to not call. But,
and the fact that he was said it, the fact that he didn't just like make an excuse or say I was sorry, but it was like, what's the right thing to say?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's very good. And I was going to say something else. I can't remember what it is now.
Sorry.
Okay, doesn't matter. Move
on. Well, I just want to add, because when you were saying it's like the parents did something similar, but there's a slight difference with the parents where it's kind of like the people on the outside looking in. They can sort of just be champions and approach this in the way that they see victimhood. The parents that are victimized by themselves, not quite the same, nowhere at the same level, but there was that line about how here they did everything they could for their daughter to be, you know, have the perfect, carefree, indestructible childhood and go on in her life and just be a total, like, strong woman. And then this happens, and to them it even feels like, why to us? Why our family? Why our daughter? And that part really got to me, because I think about my own parents, and when bad stuff has happened to me, they have a bit of that as well, right? Nowhere on this level, but because nothing this horrible has happened, but, you know, I see that, and I completely recognized it, and that's what I was talking about, the layers of victimhood, how it affects everybody differently the closer you get to the victim.
There was a line back in that section, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, it was something about all the things that they had done to protect her, and it was all wiped away in one instance. And then towards the end of the story, she's talking about how much more fragile love is than something as simple as the body. There is this concept that drives me crazy, and it goes, like, it's pervasive throughout society, that purity and women's virginity, it's like prized, and once it's gone, you're ruined, and it's an old idea that unfortunately is reflected in how people that have been sexually assaulted are kind of seen as, like, ruined, or you'll never be the same. And in the story, I see this arc going where this one thing happened, everyone is treating her as a reflection of this one thing that happened to her. And she's kind of accepted that idea that she's never going to be the same and she's ruined, even to the point where her parents do as well. But then she meets him, and there's this wonderful arc where she realizes that her heart and her emotions are worth way more than something that just physically happened to you. And that to me was really interesting and wonderful to see that arc, and it was really subtle. But I appreciated it, and I thought if it had been any more heavy-handed, it probably would have been like annoying, but I liked how it was done. It was like literally like 2 sentences, one towards the beginning and one towards the end, and I was like, okay, this works. As far as him being black, like at the beginning I was like, why is she like focusing on the fact that he's black? And then when the dad said, you know, are you sure maybe you should date someone white the first time out? It was a really, really wonderful way of saying that, you know, she was raped by a black man without saying she was raped by, you know, the 6-foot-tall black guy in a hoodie. Quote TM. You know, I thought that was a really wonderful, subtle way of saying it, but also it was so subtle, but it was also attacking the idea of when you're assaulted by someone, how easy it is to like label or be afraid of everybody that kind of reminds you of that person, and how you can not do that. And, you know, you see that whether you've been raped by a black guy or whether you've been raped by tall men or short men or blonde men or whatever. Like, you see people that have been, you know, beat up by a mom and suddenly they're afraid of all 50-year-old women. Like, you know, that kind of, that's simplifying, but you know what I mean. And I thought that that was also a really nice theme throughout it of every person is an individual, and you don't have to let these types of things affect you for the rest of your life, you know, and that she was open to dating him. She didn't see him as a black guy. She didn't look at him and be reminded of the guy that raped her, but yet her family did. That was interesting.
Yeah, and I thought also that both sets of parents acted in the same way, that they were trying to protect her by suggesting, not because he was black, but because, you know, he's a black guy who's the same as the guy who raped you. And his parents also were sort of trying to suggest that, you know, maybe he shouldn't date her because, you know, it might hurt her, it might remind her. And I thought that was good. And also this arc where she thinks about the friends. She met that friend in the shop who's gone off and you know, doesn't remember anything and doesn't care, but she remembered the people that have stayed behind and the sort of people that have stayed behind in the small town. And at that point, I think she thinks that she's better than this, and she deserves to go out and make something of herself.
Yeah, I had a little internal cheer moment when she like kind of pretended like she wasn't who she was to the lady in the store. I was like, yes, she's getting her dream back. Hooray.
So the part where the dad says, you know, oh, are you sure that you should be with him because he's black? It's funny because I read a little different than both of you, because I don't think it's that Cal reminded her parents of the rapist, because the mom even said, oh, we should have him over for dinner. We've known him since he was as high as this table. I think they do see Cal as an individual, but I don't know. For some reason, I read into it that the dad's more worried about what people will say, kind of like she has some sort of like, because you know how one way that victims deal with it is they actually seek out people who are like the perpetrator, and then you have all these like armchair psychologists sitting back there going, oh, well, of course, it's typical after what happened. I, for some reason, read it as that. It's like the dad was like being like, you know, people are going to talk. I don't know why I read it that way, but I did. Like,
I think it's interesting that you say that. I think it's interesting you say that for a couple reasons.
I don't know why.
You know, the way I looked at it wasn't so much that the parents saw him as a reflection of the rapist, but rather they saw in him that maybe she wasn't ready to date somebody that was so similar to the person that raped her. Not that they were afraid of him, but rather they were afraid that maybe she would have flashbacks or something. That's what I got from that scene. But it's interesting you say that because, okay, I'm going to take all the gloves off here. I have heard from racist young men that when they see a white woman with a black guy, that she's ruined and no other white guy will ever date her again. And especially when it comes to late cases of assault. So I get where you come from, Anais. Like I totally get seeing that line that way. I didn't see it that way. But there is a portion of the population that could very well interpret it that way because that's part of their paradigm. I live in Northern California. I live in possibly the most liberal, non-racist place on the planet. My kids have never been called a bad name, and yet I've actually heard that out of people's mouths. So, like, that is an underlying tone that is in the story just by virtue of wherever you happen to be living and the culture that you're around. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting way of interpreting it.
Yeah, can I just read that bit that we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
At the door later, my father puts his hand on my shoulders and says, "You know I like Cal, right? But that doesn't mean he's right for you. Maybe you should start with somebody we both speak at the same time." I say, "Somebody I don't like as much?" He says, "White." I shake my head in disgust. "I can't believe you said that." My father apologizes immediately, taking his hands off me and holding them in the air. "Associations," he says. "I just worry." So that's why I thought it was about her associating Cal with the guy who raped her. That's what sort of triggered that off in me.
Yeah, just like...
But it could be read both ways, I'm sure.
Yeah, totally.
Oh.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the arc, that subtle arc, I like that Constance has. I like that one of the catalysts was when Cal's mother quotes to her own Constance's valedictorian speech that she did when she was a teenager, and Constance, she rebuffs it, she calls it teenage bullshit, but it totally works. And then later she's like, "I kissed him like the fortress," or whatever that phrase was from her valedictorian. And I really like that for some reason. I feel like I don't know if it's just my generation or young people, you have this resistance to anything that feels cheesy, but it's exactly what helps her get through it. And I thought that was so well done.
Especially considering that the topic that was quoted to her was on finding strength and on being true to yourself, and that the very life that she's living is not what she was talking about as a teenager, and yet she has to embrace that teenage wisdom in order to get past the trauma that she's experiencing. I think a lot of people brush teenagers off, but when you just shut up and listen to teenagers or eavesdrop a little bit, kind of let yourself fall into the wall, amazing stuff will come out of teenagers' mouths. And that she had to embrace that was just beautiful to me. I love that part of the story. Did anybody have any parts of the story they didn't like?
No, I loved it. Actually, I'm not done with this love fest. I have one tiny more thing.
Okay, love away.
Is so, yeah, I'm in love with Cal. He's so smooth and self-possessed. When he asked her out on the date, he went from talking about aging and well, he goes from talking about oh, Kenechi. This is what happens when he's gone. We flatter him, actually. So he goes from talking about aging and having a sty in his eye, and then yeah, I'll pick you up tomorrow. Super smooth transition into asking her out based on the stuff. And I'm like, how is this guy so cool? And then when she says, "No, do you know yet?" He doesn't know. She doesn't know if he knows about the rape, and he says yes. And then just how he handles that, he's just so cool. I just loved him. Bridget Hardy, do you know this man in real life? Have you married him?
I don't think Kenechi's married yet, so I don't think she has.
No.
You know what? We need a whole part of the website just for his little fan club. It's funny you say that. What was wonderful about it was that he wasn't smooth all the way through. If he had been, he might have just been skeevy. But towards the end, when you start to see a little bit of a crack through the veneer, as you can tell, he's emotionally invested, I think that makes his smoothness even more charming, because you can tell he actually really does care. He's not a jerk. And yeah, I think I'm in love with Cal too. Completely in love with the story. Yeah. For me, it wasn't perfect. There were a couple places where there was one line in particular that was a tense change that actually stopped me short. And it would have shot me short even if I wasn't writing, because it was blatant enough that I hiccuped as I was reading it. And I love the last line, but I don't think it was done as smoothly as it could have been done. But really, those are such The few places where I had any kind of hiccup as I was reading it or any issues with reading it were so minute, and they were like seriously just like simple editing things. I was really impressed with the skill of the writer.
Yeah, I think the bit I liked when after she'd met her old classmate, and she thinks back about the other people, Joey Wolowski, who works in the post office, and Brenda Jitz, who has Down syndrome, and
Yeah,
she
and those are the people that were successful.
yeah, and it's so lightly done. Joey with a steady job now, Brenda with her own group of friends, all productively supplementing their disability checks. So, and then there's me. I've heard the talk myself. If Helen hears nothing, I hear every whisper and more, watching for it. Constance Buckle, they say, so much potential. Poor girl. And at that point, she changes, and
Hmm.
she goes to see Cal, and I think she decides that she's done grieving, she's done being this poor person that everyone feels sorry for, and she's going to become a real person from then on.
One of the things that was really great about that passage you just talked about was how specific it was. Like, she never came out and like described the small town. It was
Mm.
the small town became like the picture of the small town in my head developed through the characters' eyes as the characters were being developed. So even though like I'm not from a super tiny Midwestern town and I don't know what that experience is like, I could tell that's the type of town that she was speaking of, and I could understand and empathize with that type of living situation. I could immediately like be in that situation where I think a lot of times when a short story is in a locale or in a culture that's so different from your own, it can be difficult to really get into it, like to put yourself in that situation and feel that empathy to allow yourself to get really deep into the story. And in this story, because it was through the people's eyes, it was like it reeled me in, and it
Mm.
felt very real that way. Because the small town isn't about the streets and the buildings, it's about the people that are in it and how they see it and the limitations that they see. And that was beautiful to me. Yeah. I would like
That's
to
exactly.
learn how to do that.
Yeah, and that's a really great example of show not tell, isn't it? It's it's not important, as you say, the buildings and the streets aren't important. It's the people that are in there and how the people behave, and everything just says small town, and it's really well done, I think.
And that it can be shown in a narrative style. Like,
Mm.
this is very much a literary style. There's not a lot of scenes. There's not a lot of like dialogue and, right now this is happening type situations. It's a lot of narration and talking about what's happening. And yet it still was able to put me right in it in a way that the last story didn't. The Murakami story, again, very narrative, a lot of telling what's happening, but yet it didn't put me in it. But this was an example of having that same kind of distant style, but still being able to put me in it. And this is what I was missing from last week's story.
Mm.
I'm also really impressed with how she organized the way that she revealed information. I thought was very smart. So like before she says what it actually is, it's a big deal because she'll say things like, she's talking about how she works at the post office. She goes, I switched from the counter into the sorting department after it happened. Like these little clues that it's, shaping what it could be. And then when they're on the phone and he says, or you sound like you, he said, a comment that could have meant a lot. You suddenly realize that most people aren't seeing her as herself, or she doesn't feel as herself just from this one line. And I also like that she introduced Cal first as this genuine, self-possessed, mature man before revealing that he's black, because I think even today a lot of people, the first impression would be blackness, but now your first impression of him is, oh, he's such a good guy, such a
Mm.
great, mature guy. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really smart.
Yeah,
And
I
the
think
fact
it
that he's
was.
and the fact that he's black is almost unimportant. It's only important to the other people, to the older generation.
Which is interesting because that's why the first time it was mentioned that he was black, that's why it stood out to me, and that's why it was like a scratch on the record player, because she had made, like, the way he was described was so much about him as a person that when it was mentioned that he was black, I knew it had to have some sort of significance to the story, and it felt even a little bit heavy-handed in the way it just kind of was dropped at my feet, because it was so sudden after his very careful unrolling. But then again, then you keep reading, you realize it was necessary for that. You know, personally, I would have liked to have seen it maybe said more subtle, but I don't know how it could have been done more subtle. Like I said, it was obvious right away that it was an important punctuation point. Like, it felt like an explanation point or an underline in the story. And so it was like something that when it came up later, it was like, oh, bing, you know, and it referred me back to the earlier place in the story, which I thought, while, you know, as I was reading it the first time, it caused me a little bit of hiccup. After going on and further reading it, I thought it was very artfully done.
Yeah, the bit, that part where it was revealed they'd had a conversation, and he'd hung up. She poured a glass of wine, and she said, "For a while in high school, I thought I wanted to marry Cal. He's skinny and long, his limbs taut and dark. He had soft voice and glasses, perfect. He and his..." And then in the next paragraph it says, "He and his parents were one of a handful of black families in town and still are." So it's just,
yeah,
it's important, but it's just stated. It's not made a big. We already know Cal. We already know he's a nice guy. He's humorous. He likes her. She likes him. And
yeah.
And
I don't think, like I said, it hit me like, but at the same time, like, in modern fiction, you have to be that blatant. I was having this conversation with somebody online about diversity in fiction and how we default our characters to the point where even a story where someone is described as black, if it's only described once and it's a long novel, they will forget. And then when it's done as a movie, people will be upset that the character's black, even though it's in the book that they're black, because we're so used to seeing Caucasian characters. And so while it hit me like a punctuation point, it's a necessary punctuation point. And it also describes the town by saying that they're one of the few black families in the town, and they still are. That tells you something about the town. It also allows you to kind of see how she may have been perceived once you realize that she was raped by a black man and stabbed. You know, that's biggie. And that was the other thing that really got me, was I think a lot of men, especially really good men, you know, they will date a woman who has been assaulted, and they will be really caring and understanding and all that. But there's a line when you see the physical, like, remnants of that, and usually that's a hidden assault. But when he sees her scar, he is so deeply affected by that because it's a visual representation of this thing that's happened to her. I thought that was really intense and something that was realistic. Like, that to me struck me as, you know, they say, who said the writer's job is to write something true, just one true thing? You know, that was such a true thing in that story. I love that. And that was when the story won me over. I was like, okay, I'm in. Okay, I take off my armor. You got me.
Yeah, that bit, it's true what you just said, and that bit in the story, it says, after they'd slept together, and it says, "And in the morning with Cal, the sun slicing through my half-open blinds, I am awakened by his fingers tracing the scar on my chest. Looking at him, his eyes wide and almost scared. I know he didn't see it before. Oh baby," he says, "oh Con." So all of a sudden he knows what has happened to her, but he sees the scar, and it really hits home at that point.
Yeah. Oh, such a love fest. We really needed Kenechi this week.
You probably would have liked it too. It's too perfect.
Oh man, then all hell would have broken loose. We can't all like the same story, man. That's just not cool. Okay, so do we want to rate this puppy, or we still got anything to say?
Well, yeah, just because it's lingering in my mind when you were talking earlier about the ending, that you didn't like the last few lines. I kind of also felt like the last few lines were a little lacking, but one thing I did appreciate about the ending was how at the end of it, she was worrying about things that people who aren't carrying something like this worry about, just like love and is this relationship going to make it or will this end in heartbreak. And I think that that was really the moment where you're like, she's really ready to move on, and not move on, you never move on, but take a step forward.
Yeah. Well, I think that is, I think my problem with the last line was that that last paragraph seemed abrupt and not like, it didn't have the same way of easing into it. I don't think it was as artful as the rest of the story, but the last line is beautiful. And I can see myself editing the story and saying, this line needs to stay, now how do I get here? You know what I mean? And so I forgive her. I forgive Bridget because the last line was perfect, so I forgive her for the last paragraph.
It's very good, that preceding paragraph. It is, I wonder if we will be good enough for each other. And I know in a wretched instant that the worst thing in my life could still be coming. Who holds their mind or their body dearer than love, really? It could hurt as bad as anything. So it's she's sort of getting over what's happened to her, but she knows that there could be something even worse further down the line, not physical. And that's, I don't know. I liked that paragraph.
You know what my thing is? I like that paragraph by itself. I like the last sentence by itself. I felt like the last sentence and the last paragraph, there was a hiccup between the two. And as a writer, that story probably would have sat for a few more months, and I probably still would have published it just as it is, because I can't figure out what I would have done different. It's so beautiful. And that last paragraph, like you said, it's well worded. There's just something off there, and I can't put my finger on it, And it's noticeable because the rest of the story is so not off. Like, there are so few places that hiccuped for me. So few places. We've read some really famous stories. We've read some stories by masters, and we can always find something. We can always find something that could be better, can be improved. But this story was pretty darn close to flawless until that last bit. And if the rest of the story hadn't been so good, I probably wouldn't have even noticed. That's the curse of it all,
Too perfect.
I would have been like, oh, this is a great story. Nothing wrong.
There always has to be something.
Yeah, that's the plight of the author, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, this author really has my admiration, and I understand she's been published in a few other places, so thank you for alerting me to her existence. I definitely plan on looking up those other stories, and I hope she continues to write, because that story was very enjoyable, and she has a great voice. Yeah. It was a great voice. Beautiful. So, for this week, are we ready to rate this thing?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about how I want to rate it. I'm going to give it a 5. Like a really good, solid 5. I would give it 5.5, but it's just not quite like, the sky didn't open up and the harps didn't play, but it was amazing and it was beautiful and I enjoyed it, and yeah, I'm going to give it a Kenechi 5.
Okay. Anais?
I'm going to give it a 5.5. I really liked it.
Very good. And I'm giving it 6. Perfect for me.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Have any of our stories gotten a 6 yet? I think that's our first 6.
I think it's the first 6.
You didn't even give Hemingway a 6, Gerald.
No, I know.
That is high praise.
I thought it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful length. It's beautifully written. The themes are really well explored, and yeah, I can't, I don't have a problem with the ending. I just think it's great.
Wow, that is awesome. That is so awesome. I'm just kind of speechless. Okay.
I'm feeling all sort of, I don't know, beaming at the moment.
Well,
I
yeah.
was gonna say, I wanted to take a picture of Gerald's face. He's got this huge, adorable smile. He's just like so happy.
Well, I mean, not only did we get our first 6 on the show, but it's for unknown author. Like, we have examined some
Yeah.
of the best authors of, the last 100 years. And that just makes me really happy. That makes me very happy. Okay, last week.
Last week, we discussed Toni Takatani by Haruki Murakami, and listeners gave it a 4.25.
That's
Need
really high,
more
too.
Great. Yes,
I
it
like
is.
that the people that were, okay, the conversation with Todd and your mom, awesome. Total awesome sauce on the website. They are both such intellectuals, and just, it's wonderful reading the comments under there. But I think it's interesting that the people that were commenting like the story more than me and Gerald did, and I thought that was really interesting. And I'm wondering, like, how much of that is because we're writers? Like, I'm wondering how much of, us being so picky about story and character and wanting to be drug in is affected not only by us being writers, but the type of writers we are. And yeah, being able to go on the website and see the ratings from pure readers was very enlightening and interesting, and I love the detail of the comments. So if you want to see a really good conversation, head over to the website and check it out.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing about the comment section. I feel like the comment section is a great place to put conversations we didn't have time for on the podcast. So for the comment section of this story, Constance's Law, please join me, because there's this age motif, the talking about aging throughout the story that we didn't quite get to, and I don't know what I want to say about it. So I want to talk to listeners about it and see what you think of the thread of aging throughout the whole story.
That is a really great idea, because like you, I noticed it, but again, I wasn't sure what. It was one of those underlying themes that kind of just scratched at the back of my neck, and I couldn't quite put my words on what was being said about it. Like, whether it was a reflection of how she was being perceived by people of various ages or what. And so, yeah, I think that's a great idea to put that conversation on the website. And you can get there just www.literaryroadhouse.com/podcast. And I guess that's my cue. Wow, this feels so weird since we started doing this. For listeners of I know, it just feels really weird. For listeners of Literary Roadhouse, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with free 30-day trial to give you an opportunity to check out the service. As I've told you before, I've been a member since 2008. I have listened to a lot of audiobooks on Audible, like a lot of audiobooks on Audible. Right now I'm listening to Love in the Time of Cholera. It's a great read by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. We read one of his stories, 2-3 weeks ago, and this was the book that Kenechi recommended I read as, a jumping off point into his novels. I'm really enjoying it right now. It's a good sized audiobook. And so if you want to get your copy of Love in the Time of Cholera or any other book, you can go to audibletrial.com/literary roadhouse. Again, that is audibletrial.com/literary roadhouse for your free 30-day trial.
Now it's time to choose next week's story. I'm hosting the game, so what stories would you like to read next week?
Oh, I wish Kenechi was here so I had some idea how to pronounce this. I'm picking a different story because, if I try a different story, maybe I'll get it this time. I really want to read something by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and this story is Olakoi. It was recently reposted onto Medium by her, and so, yeah, that's the one. Okay. Olikoye.
Okay, and I'm putting in The Veldt by Ray Bradbury. When Jocelyn Johnson was guest hosting, she had put it in for me, but then Kenechi won, so now it's my chance to win for Bradbury.
Hooray.
Okay. Gerald, let's do this thing.
It's a very simple game.
That's what you always say.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with colours this time. I would like you each in turn to give me a word that rhymes with cat. Very simple.
What?
Yeah, a word that rhymes with cat.
Okay, who goes first?
Anais, because she's on the left.
Hat.
Hat with a H. Is that
Tat.
H? Yeah.
Bat with a B.
Yeah.
Rat.
Yep.
Flat.
Yep.
Gnat. No, that's got a K in it. Yeah,
No, it
that's still
rhymes.
fine.
It's
Yeah,
rhyming.
yeah, it rhymes. Wow, I'm tired.
Mat with an M.
Yep.
Really, Maya? Really, Maya? You've got to be kidding me, Maya. um.
Time's
Why?
up.
My brain just like totally did like this whole like it was like someone shook it and like an Etch-a-Sketch and it's gone.
These games are like that. You sort of start and you think, oh, it's easy. This.
Oh yeah, this is going totally easy, and then I'm just like,
And they play
chat.
social
Like
sphere. Yeah,
that's
we
what
can do
chat. Why didn't I just say chat? Like hello.
that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can't believe I did that. Wow,
Huge list down here.
that was lame.
There you go.
Thank you for
So-
making me look stupid for all of our listeners. I appreciate that, Gerald. One of these days, I'm going to get you back.
Good job. So we are reading Anais' story next week.
Yep, that is The Veld by Ray Bradbury. Finally getting a Ray Bradbury in here.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Who's he?
To join the discussion, visit www.literaryroadhouse.com. I also encourage you to leave a quick iTunes review and tell us your favorite short story so far. Your reviews encourage us and help others find our podcast. Don't forget to tell your friends, and until next time, read a good story.
Dun, dun, dun.